Okay, we rolling?
Yep, we're rolling.
Okay, we're rolling, Andrew.
All right.
I guess you identify yourself, you know who you are. I don't know if you want to say you're leaving soon or not, but...
No, I mean, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
So my name is... Do you want me to look at the camera, obviously? Or do you want me to look this way?
Look at me.
Look
yeah,
at you?
I would say, like, wait, look this way.
Like that?
Yeah, like right in
Okay.
this way. If you want to stand here, because I know it's easier.
If you're going to be
Okay.
asking questions,
when it's
yeah.
interviewing, to
okay.
look at the
Because that way it can be like a conversation,
Okay.
talking to each other.
Okay.
All right, so my name is Andrew Closter. I'm the current Watershed Programs Coordinator for the Donebrook Watershed Partnership. Right now we are standing along the Donebrook, right as the Donebrook is exiting its gorge area, and right before we descend into the culvert that takes it into Ambler Park. The Donebrook is a roughly 9-mile stream on the east side of Cleveland. It starts in Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights, flows through those heights neighborhoods into the city of Cleveland, underneath the University Circle, and then along Rockefeller Park through the Cultural Gardens, and eventually enters into Lake Erie at the Cleveland Lakefront Nature Preserve, where it traditionally would have had an open estuary, an open mouth, but is currently culverted through the Lakefront Nature Preserve. We as an organization are dedicated to protecting and promoting the stream and the watershed, teaching local residents about the stream, about the parklands that are along it, and about stormwater pollution and other ways in which our human activities impact the stream, and we can also potentially with our activities benefit the stream. So we host a whole diverse range of programming throughout the year, including hikes along the stream and through the gorge itself. We do stewardship activities such as removing invasive plants, planting native plants. We have large watershed festivals that we host annually, including a family fishing day event that we do at Rockefeller Park Lagoon, where we educate a bunch of kids about fishing. We give them free rods, free lunch, and it's really just a nice way for families and kids to enjoy some time outside in one of the local parks, learn maybe a new recreational skill, and just hopefully learn a little bit about their local waterways and watershed. We also have a large event that we host every year on Lower Lake in Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights, which is a kayaking event where kids can similarly learn a new skill in terms of kayaking, canoeing, and hopefully again learn about their local watershed, learn about the history of the watershed, the geology of the watershed, and once more the human impact, how we as humans, we as residents of the watershed are impacting it constantly and how it benefits us. We also have storm drain stenciling activities that we do periodically throughout the warm months of the year, where residents go out with stencils that say Lake Erie starts here, and they stencil them on the street next to storm drains just to educate the residents on that street and the volunteers themselves about these connections between our stormwater systems and our local hydrology. Because ultimately whatever is running down those storm drains, whether it's trash, whether it's oil, whether it's salt, is going to end up in our streams and end up in Lake Erie, which is the source of our drinking water here locally. So again, our programming, our educational stance, it's all about, on one hand, introducing people to this local asset, this resource that's here, that exists, that they can take advantage of, because so many local residents and just Northeast Ohio residents in general don't recognize and realize that these streams are here and that they are, places that they can recreate. They're places that they can just enjoy some potentially quiet meditation. Whatever form of outdoor activity you'd like to do, you can potentially do it along the stream here in Donebrook. And then, on the other hand, educate, as I said, people about the impacts that they have in their personal lives by the decisions that they make on the stream, on the ecology, on the watershed, and how it's all connected. What happens in Cleveland Heights is going to impact Glenville and St. Clair Superior. It's going to impact Lake Erie. The watershed is kind of a bridge between these communities, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like that on the surface, or these communities don't feel like they have much connection with each other. They have this local ecological resource that is connecting them. They share a kind of ecological address.
So what are some of the challenges you say, face Donebrook? Specifically pollution. I know there's like several cleanups. How often do you have cleanups, and how much of a problem is pollution, specifically plastic pollution, for Donebrook?
So pollution's a major issue. There's not a single source of pollutants that really contributes to the stream's degraded water quality. And it is unfortunately, it may look pristine in the image, it is unfortunately not a very clean or pristine stream when it comes to the actual water quality, and that's simply just the the result of being an urban stream. I mean, we have neighborhoods on both sides of us. We have Fairhill on one side, North Park on the other. There's traffic, there's residences, there's development, there's pavement, there's parking lots. Everything that is occurring on that impervious surface, on the parking lots, on people's lawns, on driveways, is going to ultimately end up here in the stream, because it's going to go into the stormwater system, and the stormwater sewers empty into our local streams before, when there's a major storm event, it overflows into the local streams. So any impact, anything that people are doing when they're littering in their local parks or littering on their streets, if they're not, if they're changing their oil in their driveway, if they're over salting in their driveway, if they are putting a bunch of chemicals, fertilizers on their lawn and that washes off in the rain, it's going to impact the local water quality right here. And so that's the problem, is it's not like we have one or two major polluters that we can point to and rally the community to potentially prevent that pollution. It's non-point source pollution, which means that it's kind of a tragedy to the commons. Every single individual, it's the choices that they're making in their own personal lives that impacts this stream and impacts the local water quality. So pollution is a major issue. It's probably the major issue in terms of the stream's kind of ecological health. I mean, there are issues as well with, especially down in Rockefeller Park, where the stream has been channelized, and that causes issues as well. But I mean, pollution and non-point source pollution specifically is the major challenge that the Doan Brook faces. And plastics, obviously, as something that are probably the predominant form of litter that are going on in the streets and ending up in storm drains and washing down storm drains, are definitely a major thing that is being carried by the stream. Usually, ultimately, probably during a major storm event, is going to end up down in Rockefeller Park, or it's going to end up in Lake Erie, which again is the source of all of Cleveland's drinking water. So
now, how often do they have cleanups? Now,
so we do cleanups. I mean, a lot of local organizations, local environmental organizations, do cleanups periodically throughout the year. We have big cleanups typically in the spring, right around Earth Day is when we've traditionally done it, where we will hit this area, we'll have a cleanup here in the gorge, we'll also have a cleanup in Rockefeller Park. And we have started doing some cleanups as well in Forest Hill Park. That's not technically in the Doan Brook watershed, but it's our neighboring east side watershed. It's the Dugway. The Dugway Brook is only really open in a few segments, and one of those is in Forest Hill Park. And Forest Hill Park is also just a really amazing local amenity for Cleveland Heights, East Cleveland. So we do a cleanup there. We've started doing a cleanup there, I should say, the last couple of years, annually around Earth Day as well. It's just easier in the spring to do these sorts of cleanups just because you don't have the vegetation growing up everywhere and obscuring the trash, hiding the fact that there is trash potentially on these hillsides. So we usually do that in the spring, although we've hosted cleanups throughout the year, kind of on a case-by-case basis if there's a volunteer group who'd like to do it. But our big annual ones are always around Earth Day.
Now, can you talk a little bit about the floatable control unit?
I mean, I don't know a whole lot about that in particular. I mean, that's something that would probably be a better question for Roy Larrick or the sewer district, because they're the ones who installed that in Dugway Brook. I mean, the idea is like where you have, especially dead time. The idea with those floatable control units is, like, the one that you saw in the video, for instance, is in the Dugway estuary, so it's trying to capture as much of that kind of floatable trash, the trash that's going to be carried by a storm surge or by a storm event, and end up in Lake Erie. So that's why it's probably about a half a mile, three-quarters of a mile from the mouth of Dugway with Lake Erie, is because it's capturing that trash before it gets into that estuary habitat and out into the lake. I don't know if Doan Brook has any similar sort of structure on it, simply because Doan Brook, again, before the lake it goes into a culvert, so there's probably some sort of catchment device on those culverts. There typically is trash racks or other devices before a culvert opening that will capture that trash, primarily because, you're trying to make sure that those culverts don't get clogged and cause flooding, especially in like the University Circle neighborhood. But with the Dugway, that floatable controls unit, that's specifically to prevent that trash from entering into Lake Erie.
Okay, talk a little bit about Voices of the Brook. I know it's a program that you implemented, but it really hasn't taken off. So what do you want to see happen with that project?
So Voices of the Brook was an idea that we had, because we do all this community programming, and a lot of it is based on, we're trying to be responsive to the community, and we've developed these events over time based on interests that certain community members had in a specific kind of activity or event. So most of our programming has kind of developed organically. But the idea with Voices of the Brook was that we wanted to have people give back to us, in a sense, their perception, their perspective of anything, whether it's our events and programming, whether it's our education, whether it's just the brook itself or the parks that surround it. And the idea was to host it on our website and allow people to submit artwork or submit photos or submit stories, personal anecdotes, whatever whatever you can submit in a digital format to us, and then we would host it on our website. I mean, so it was an idea that never really took off, just because we never really had the time to promote it. Didn't really have, I don't think, like a great website for allowing that. I mean, we recently redesigned our website and made it a little bit easier to navigate. But really, it's always been just kind of one of those things that was shelved or on the back burner that we thought would be a really cool way to engage with the community in a sort of different way than we usually do, which is where we're the one hosting the event and putting on the event, in the sense that the community could be giving back to us all of their kind of insights or knowledge or wisdom, or just, again, their artistic vision, their perspective, perception of the work that we do, and also, the value that this local stream, the parklands, the watershed has in their lives or in their families' lives. I mean, a lot of people have lived here for a long time, maybe even generations have grown up and lived along the brook. And so being able to capture some of that, some of those voices, some of those stories would be really valuable, not just for us as an organization, but for the community as a whole, to drive home, again, this idea that there may not be a lot of natural connections between Glenville and Cleveland Heights that people can see on the surface, but they do share this resource and they share this green space. So that's really the concept. Again, it never really got off the ground, and that's partly on us because we never really had the time or the ability to promote it heavily. But we're hoping to, kind of correct for that and make it a bigger part of our initiative going forward.
Now, what kind of collaborations do you have with public schools? I know you work closely with the Harvey Rice School. Is that the only school you work with, or?
That's the one that's had the most consistent programming recently, simply because we contract with someone who has been engaged with that school specifically.
So mention the name of the school.
Yeah, Marcia Hood. We contract with Marcia Hood, who has been engaged with that school very specifically, and it's ideally located because it's right down MLK from this area that we're in right now. So
just name the school, because you didn't actually say Harvey Rice.
So Harvey Rice is right down MLK. The middle school, elementary school, and the library also, as a community center, are right down MLK, less than a mile from where we're standing right now. So it's easily accessible to the students who go to that school and the people who attend the library. And so, yeah, with that school, we've had a very we've developed that relationship over time, especially recently. But we work with most of the school districts in the watershed on a case-by-case basis. Teachers will reach out and we'll lead hikes, or after-school groups, summer school groups will reach out and we'll lead hikes, we'll do programming. So it really varies, and I think we've probably touched a lot of the school districts in our watershed at one point or in time. But yeah, at least the last 2-3 years, it's been the Harvey Rice School that we've worked with the most consistently, simply because we had the capacity to do that. I mean, that's really our limitation. We don't have a full-fledged educational staff. I mean, at the moment, it's just me and Tori. So, it's however far we can stretch ourselves in terms of how much we can work with and engage with school groups in the community.
Now, how do you explain the Donebrook watershed to school-age children? How do you articulate that?
It starts with kind of basic. I mean, even when we're talking to adults, if I ask them what a watershed is, there's usually kind of blank stares. So it starts with just that basic kind of concept of, a watershed is essentially the area of land that all drains to a body of water. And for kids, I think they, at some point in school, maybe not in elementary school like kindergarten, first grade, but they do learn about the water cycle. They learn about how water flows across a landscape. But typically, especially if we're dealing with an urban school district, typically those pictographs or diagrams that they show in schools of water cycles are like a natural area with like a mountain and plains and, an ocean. And so they don't really reflect what we see here locally in Northeast Ohio, especially for a kid who lives in a neighborhood with streets and storm sewers. A watershed isn't going to work like it would in a natural environment. So, getting them to realize that even though they live on a street and they don't see maybe like a stream anywhere nearby, or maybe their local stream is even culverted underneath the street, still it's there, still the local hydrology is functioning. Everything that is, all the rain that is being collected is ultimately ending up in Lake Erie. So these neighborhoods may not feel like they have much kind of ecological value, but they do, in the sense that they're connected to our hydrology here, and they all end up all of the impacts end up in Lake Erie. So it's really just starting with that basic understanding. When I'm taking kids out along the brook and we're talking about the watershed, I'm really not trying to get too complex. I just want them to recognize that there is value, ecological value in their urban neighborhoods, even if it doesn't seem like it. And I think a big thing too with school kids is, hopefully if we can, just getting them out on these trails along the brook so they can see somewhat what a natural stream course is supposed to look like, and recognize that there are these areas of pristine kind of like ecological beauty in their nearby where they live, near their neighborhoods, that they can come back and take advantage of.
Now, how is the Dome Brook, this gorge, positioned in relationship to the city? I mean, it's like right in the middle of the city. So when you look at this area, you don't think that there's like streets and stuff right around here. So how?
So like right up to our left, my left is Fair Hill Road, and right up to our right is North Park, and right down the stream about probably a quarter of a mile is the intersection of North Park, MLK, Fair Hill, heavily kind of trafficked intersection. But yeah, when you're right here, you don't recognize that. You can faintly hear the traffic, but you primarily hear the brook, you hear birds. And so just introducing kids to that as well, showing them that this resource is here for them to take advantage of and for them to enjoy, and it is nearby where a lot of people live, is, I think, valuable. I mean, it's kind of the idea of building more access to our parklands and our green spaces, because so many neighborhoods are so disconnected from their local park spaces and green spaces. And there's a lot of value that comes from having somewhat of an outdoor lifestyle. I mean, there's healthy lifestyles, being outdoors, walking, hiking. You don't even have to be too active. There's plenty of studies that show and continue to show how beneficial that can be to people's health. So, getting that kind of mindset started from an early age that there's value in this is important.
Now, how, like, as far as wildlife, what type of wildlife does like this brook area attract?
In terms of mammals, you're going to see a lot. There's deer down here, there's squirrels, chipmunks, all your kind of mammals that live in Northeast Ohio in our urban areas, are going to frequent this area because it's relatively undeveloped and they can feel less, threatened by humans, although there's plenty of human activity down here as well. And of course, bird species. The big draw of the Doane Brook, I'd say green space in general, is the fact that starting at Lakefront Nature Preserve, running through Rockefeller Park with maybe a little bit of discontinuity in University Circle, but then as soon as you get into the gorge and going up to the Shaker Lakes, it's basically a contiguous green space from Lake Erie all the way into the inner suburbs. And so birds frequent and travel all along the brook because it's kind of become a migratory route for them. They can avoid the urban areas and just stick to the green space along the brook. So at Lakefront, I don't know the exact number, but at the preserve, they've seen around 200 different species of birds. And we get a ton of them, again, flying along the brook as a flyway as they, migrate south or migrate north. So bird species, there's a ton of bird species abundance. There's a ton of, all your typical mammal species that you'd see in urban Cleveland neighborhoods. The one area where it's lacking is in the aquatic kind of category, just because the stream's water quality is not great. There's not a ton of fish. There's not a ton of aquatic insects and life. We'd like to do, improve that as much as possible, and that's part of what the education is focused on, is improving the aquatic ecosystem. But it's a challenge. Again, it's a challenge. The ecosystem here is well fit for aquatic life. It's just the water quality, because of all the 9-point source pollution, is usually compromised, especially after storm events.
Now, final question: what are some of the challenges that Doane Brook Watershed faces that you're currently working on, as far as planning and on the horizon that you see?
One challenge from an organizational standpoint is just that we are a small organization. And so as much as we want to be responsive to the community and be a community asset, we can only stretch ourselves so far. Again, there's only 2 full-time staff at the moment. So, we want to be able to, every person who reaches out and has an idea, we want to be able to respond to that as effectively as possible, but we're limited by what we can do. We're limited by how far as human beings we can stretch ourselves. So that's one challenge. It's just from a capacity standpoint, we're a very, very small organization. That allows us to be kind of flexible and adaptable, but it also, hinders kind of the full reach that we potentially could have if we had, a fully staffed 10-person organization. Another challenge, and kind of a perennial challenge, is making sure that we're being as inclusive and just mindful of the diversity within our watershed, because it's kind of a microcosm of Northeast Ohio's demographics. I mean, you have the inner ring suburbs, you have Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights represented at one end of the watershed, and on the other end of the watershed is, you know, the neighborhoods of Cleveland, in Cleveland of Glenville, St. Clair Superior, Huff. And so, you know, that spans the socioeconomic kind of divide in the Northeast Ohio, it spans the racial divide. And so trying to be an organization that works for all those communities simultaneously in terms of, you know, including everyone in our events and making sure our events are as inclusive as possible, and, you know, trying to tailor events to the specific audiences and communities so that they feel, you know, they feel as if we're working with them, and, you know, making sure that all those communities as well feel kind of bought into the mission and feel some ownership over the mission. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard to kind of try to span those divides. I mean, this is a challenge for any organization trying to work amongst, you know, and in diverse communities. So that's a continuous challenge. And, you know, we see that sometimes, you know, we'll host events in the Heights and it will primarily be a specific audience, a typical, you know, one sort of kind of attendee that comes out. We'll host an event in Cleveland and it's a different sort of attendee that comes out, but there's maybe not a lot of cross-pollination. And I think that would be the goal in the long run. The ideal goal in the long run was to have this idea that this is a shared asset, and people from either end of the watershed can come out to events on either end of the watershed and feel that there's kind of that shared value here, and they do share this resource. We're not there yet. I mean, I think we've made strides. We've, you know, gone further than maybe some other watershed organizations, but it's still, I mean, it's nothing that you're going to do overnight. It's nothing that you're going to do in a day or in a week or in a year. I mean, it takes a long time, a lot of just work, getting people to trust the organization, getting people to care about the organization, getting the next generation, the kids, to care about the organization and the asset, the value that they have in it. Yeah, I mean, again, it is a challenge. I don't like to think of it as a challenge necessarily. I like to think of it a little bit more as an opportunity, because I think the fact that we're positioned the way that we are geographically, the fact that it in a sense is almost like a bridge between these different communities, is really more of an opportunity than a challenge, because, you know, it gives you an ability to kind of talk about what can be shared between communities that, again, in this country, unfortunately, we don't always see the natural connections between. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much. That was cool.
Well, I hope there's some good content.